Okay, here we go. Okay, so good evening, everybody. And we're continuing with our Masa. We'll do our recap. Thank you for all your feedback, by the way. And one suggestion that I'm not doing this week, but maybe we'll think about it next week, is to do the recap at the end to see how the letter we just learned fits in. But what I'll do this week to, I guess it'll also make it slightly more focused, but also give us a better view of the insight that I keep trying to bring attention to, the parallelism, if there's such a word, between the units and the tens. So let's jump into it. The first pair of letters that we're going to look at are the Aleph and Yud. The Aleph is 1 and the Yud is 10, and both of them symbolize Hashem. Aleph is Elokim, Yud is Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and both of them are the source of affluence. The numbers on the right are the tens, so we're talking about in the general view of things, which means a more spiritual view of things. Then we had the bet and the kaf, two letters which look very similar to each other, and both of them, one's a bite, one's a clear or a spoon, symbolize a vessel that can hold the affluence. And these two are like two pairs opposite each other, two extremes. And in the middle, we have the gimel, the number 3 or the 30 or the lamed, and being a perfect balance between having the input, the inside, the spirituality, the affluence on the one hand, but having something to house it and present it on the other hand, allows this unit to be the ultimate giver. And the ultimate giver is, in fact, we're talking spiritually, is the teacher. And that's the lamed, the melamed. And who do they give to? They give to the dalet. The dalet is the four corners of this earth, or the dal is also somebody who has nothing. And that completes the process. And when we spoke about the mem, we said the mem are the processes in the world. We spoke about all the 40 days, 40 years, etc., etc. And why does it complete the process? Because when you have these three above, who are the givers, combining together to give to the receiver, you have a complete process, and that is represented by the hey and the nun, the 5 and the 50, the completion, the perfection in unity, and that was the nun. And finally, the last pair that we've seen so far are the vav and the samech, the 6 and the 60. And the 6, we said, are looking at the world, the 6 corners of the world, the physical world. And the samech is the round perfection, like the circle, 360 degrees, that you have the same influence, the same perfection in all directions. Or in a global sense, Hashem, when he manages the world, he manages all aspects of the world and things that all the parameters that we are not even capable of understanding. So that's the parable between the 6 and the 60. Should have actually written what Zayin, Chet, and Tet are here. Zayin and Chet is important because that's what we're going to talk about its partner, the Ayin, today. So Zayin is the combination of the Vav and the Yud, Hashem within the nature. Chet is above nature, and Tet are the units in all different directions, less important for today. So with that was a quick recap, slightly quicker than usual. And we're moving on to the Ayin. And the Ayin is a very interesting letter because we all know what is an Ayin. An Ayin is an eye, right? And here it's quite, I was going to say, it's quite visible that the word is the same word. And what does the eye represent? Well, eye is clearly visibility. It allows you to see things. Your eye, if you like, is your interface, is your window to the world. You know, we have our inner world. We have all our thoughts and everything we think of. And we have the outer world that's outside. And what allows the input from the outer world to our inner world is mainly our eyes. It's also our ears and smell, but the biggest influence is our eyes. But we'll see now that there's more to the eye than that. Now, I've spoken till now, the input of the physical views that we see of the eye. But the truth is we also have a spiritual eye that the Torah uses a lot. Okay, and right here in Beraishit, when Adam and Eve eat the fruit that they were not meant to eat, and the Torah says, "Vatifkachna einei shnehem veyedu kerumum hem." Sorry, I didn't translate it in printing here, but I'll translate verbally. Both their eyes, the eyes of both of them were opened, and then they knew they were naked. In other words, opening of the eyes becomes, on the spiritual sense, the meaning of understanding. In other words, when you say, even in English today and in Hebrew, when you say, I hear what you're saying, we say sometimes, I see what you're saying. I see what you're getting at. Now, I don't see anything, right? But it means I understand your point. So we use the word, the sight, as a mashal, as a parable, to represent spiritual sight. Now, all this is on the assumption that we normally assume that the eyes are one-way streets, that they're a one-direction sensor. In other words, your eyes take in from the outside. But the truth is, the eyes are actually working in both directions. Okay, when we say to someone, "Look into my eyes," right? Well, we're saying that actually there's some secrets. If I was hiding a secret from you, you'd be able to see it in my eye. Okay, and I'm not sure that Uri Geller is genuine or not, and I'm not going to give an opinion, but there are definite influences that looking at people do have. I'm sure we've all experienced the feeling that you're sitting somewhere and you feel something, someone's looking around, and you turn around and you see somebody staring you in the back. There is some feeling, some sort of message that comes out of the eye. So the eye is not only an input, it's also an output. And it's not only a physical input, it's also a spiritual input, and therefore it's also a spiritual output. And by the way, we'll get to it later, but that's why the Torah is actually very, very strict about what we look at and what we don't look at. Okay, the laws of modesty are not simple laws, and people are careful not to look at things that are immodest, because there is an influence that has on us spiritually. Another example of this, I haven't brought it in the notes here, but the Gemara says that you should not look at a person who's a rasha, an evil person, because when you look at something, there's an influence on you. And if you look at somebody who's evil, it's not a good thing to do. And this is interesting. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but all the time they publish in the newspapers pictures of all sorts of terrorists and murderers, and sometimes we look at them in horror, but it's not recommended to spend a lot of time looking at these pictures. There can be an effect on us. Okay, one thing I didn't translate over here is Doma, Rahiya, Leshmia. Okay, that's a midrash that says that sight is far more powerful than hearing. Okay, if we say that hearing and listening, seeing and listening are the two main inputs that we have, seeing something has a far bigger effect on you, right? If somebody wants to be a witness in a court, that's what I wrote over here, it doesn't help if you heard somebody saying something. If he saw it with his eyes, then he can be a witness. And I think also if you can hear a story. I mean, for one thing that comes to mind now, when was it, about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, when we had all these piguim, all these terrorist attacks in Israel. So you hear about them all the time. But even if you see a video, it suddenly changes the picture completely. If you, God forbid, were in attack or saw something happening, the effect is far greater. So that's the eye and everything that the eye symbolizes. The second quality of the 5 qualities that we're looking at is the Gamachia, the numerical value. And here the number is 70, which I already said in the recap that 70 is parallel to 7. Like we always say, the tens and the units are parallel to each other. And we said that 7 is like the combination of God's godliness and this world. In other words, you have this world, but then you realize that in this world, there's godliness. Okay, you have the 6 days of the week, which are the physical days. You have the Shabbat, which is the 7th day. It makes it a whole system, if you like, of spiritual, physical combination. I don't know why I brought this pasuk right here at the moment. I think it belongs later on. Let's keep going. I don't see anything that we can learn from the sound, and I haven't seen anything written, anything that we can learn from the sound of the Ayin, so I've shaded it out. The shape of the Ayin is very interesting. It's a complex shape, and if you look at it, you see that it's got a Zayin. Okay, if you hide out, if you just look at the left side, that's clearly looks like a Zayin. And on the right side, it looks like a long Vav. Although some people say that it's a Yud that's been stretched, it doesn't really matter because we've learned in the past that a Vav is actually a long Yud. Right? If Yud is Hashem and Vav is the pipe, that's Hashem's influence coming down. So what we said, you remember what we said when we said that what is a Vav? A Vav is looking at the physical perfection, the great physicality in the world. The Zayin is combining it with Hashem. Now, these are two different types of perspectives of the world. And normally these two perspectives contradict each other. Here, what happens in the Ayin, that we actually try bring them together. Even though looking at the world purely physical, or looking at the world on a spiritual combination, seem to contradict each other. Is the world a world of nature, where nature takes its course, or is the world a world of Hashem, where Hashem manages the nature? And here we try to bring them together. I'll just say, we're going to get to it in the next slide, but I'll give a hint to it, that we've actually got two eyes. And we've heard of the term Ayin Hara and Ayin Hatov. The good eye and the bad eye, the evil eye, Ayin Hora in Yiddish. And I think this is hinted to in these two parts of the Ayin, right? You have the one side of the Ayin that's got Hashem, and that's the Ayin Hatov. You know, even though you see nature taking its course, you realize that there's the ultimate good, there's Hashem who is managing the nature, even though you see nature taking its course. And then you have the Ayin Hara. And all of the time in this world, we're looking with two eyes, and we're meant to look with two eyes. Okay, why are we meant to look with two eyes? We're not meant to be. If we just believe that nature and man runs the world, we think we've got complete control. On the other hand, if we think that Hashem's there and He'll do everything for us, we may relinquish control completely and say, well, Hashem, you take care of everything, right? I'll just learn in your shiva the whole day, and that's all that's required of me. And that's not what Judaism says we should do. And all the time we have this balance between trying to find the balance of how much do we control and how much do we put in Hashem's hands. And those, I think, are the two sides of the Ayin that are all the time and should be all the time creating, let's even call it a healthy tension in our lives. And by the way, it can change. It can change with our age. It can change with the realities, our personal realities, and it can change with the global realities. For example, in a world reality of 200 years ago, where people had to bring the water from the well and wash the clothes and the dishes, and you had to go out to the Kleinhesi to the toilet outside, and people spent a lot of time doing physical work in order to exist. It's possible that as time progresses, and we've got more, these things can be done automatically with us, thanks to modern technology. it's an opportunity for us to move more from the Vav to the Ayin. Okay, so that's interesting insight, talking about the Ayin, about these two eyes and how they change with time. There is another view in the Shulchan Aruch that I said that this is actually not a Vav, but a Yud, and essentially the Shulchan Aruch, right? Why would the Shulchan Aruch talk about the letters? Because in the Shulchan Aruch, there's a chapter that talks how you have to write each of these letters, right? When you buy a mezuzah or tefillin or a sefer Torah, the letters have to be written according to everything that we talk about. For example, Ayin is one of the letters that Brian asked about in the past, that's got a crown. Okay, we'll get to that, please God, in the next couple of months. But if you do an Ayin without a crown, it's a problem. Or if you do another letter that shouldn't have a crown with a crown, it's also a problem. So in describing what the Ayin is, the Shulchan Aruch says you draw a Zayin and you draw a long Yud. So it's sort of written there that if you take the Gamachia of these two letters, the Yud is 10, the Zayin is 7, together you get 17, which is the Gamachia of Tov. Again, telling us that even though we have the two eyes, we should strive as much as possible to strengthen our Ayin Tova, Ayin Tov. And the final parameter that we look at in the standard parameters is the first time the word appears in the Torah. That starts with the letter Ayin, and that is right in the second verse of Bereshit. V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'bohu v'choshech al pnei tehom. Okay, so what is the Ayin over here? The Ayin is the beginning of the Al. In other words, the world hasn't yet quite been created. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim va'aretz. So something has happened, okay? But in this initial state, there's still a total balagan, and there's no order. But nevertheless, the potential for the world is there. In other words, if you look at it superficially, the world is a complete balagan. But actually, what's going to happen afterwards in the remainder of creation, the seed that's been put down already in the word Bereshit is going to generate the next set of generation of creation. And in fact, the Big Bang Theory says that there was some explosion that nobody can explain. No scientists can explain it yet, but it's clear to scientists that something big happened, a big source of energy, and that was the beginning of this world. And then afterwards, there was some sort of evolutionary process. Now, different people, different rabbis react differently to the evolutionary process, but Rav Kook says actually the concept of evolution is a very religious concept. Evolution says the world is striving towards perfection. Okay, he won't accept the concept of the survival of the fittest, because that means that things are random. But if you say that there's a God controlling the evolution, that's a spiritual process. And in fact, Rashi himself, even the most basic commentator on the Torah, says that everything happened in Bereshit. The whole world was created in the word Bereshit. And then afterwards, Hashem said, okay, now that we've got the potential, let's evolve and bring out the water, separate the water and the earth. Let's bring out the grass that's below ground level, and so on and so forth. So the letter Al, the letter Ayin in the word Al, is taking something that on a superficial level looks like Ayin Hara, but actually within it, if you're able to have depth of sight, you can actually see that that whole Seder, the whole order of the world that's going to be created, is in there in nature. So I think what we're looking at here is 70. It's the whole world coming together. And when the world comes together, there's this combination of physical and spiritual in the whole mechanism of everything that controls the world, not in our personal lives. And when you see this, it can be confusing. You sometimes think you're seeing the Vav, and sometimes you think you're seeing the Zayin. And our challenge is to bring this together to make the Tov. So let's move on to a couple of other points that hopefully will enhance this general idea that we've seen. So my favorite Gemara, I left a bit of preparation to beat on. There's a lot of translations that I left out. I'm relying on on you listening to me today. So the children that spoke about the meaning of the letters in the Gemara that I always like bringing, they bring two explanations for the combination of the letters Samech Ayin. We saw it last week, in fact, in the Samech. The first is Somech Aniyim. Okay, Hashem supports. We said Samech is a support. So Hashem supporting in all 6 directions. And who does he support? The Aniyim. It's interesting that the word Ani, a poor person, is the same letters as Ayin, just with the letters changed around. If you put the Yud in between the Ayin and the Nun, you get Ayin, you get the I. I think this was what tells us that sometimes what makes a person appear to be poor is how he views himself. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, Ezehu Ashir, who is rich, who is wealthy, Hasamech b'chelko, somebody is happy with his lot. And you see this a lot. I mean, I'm sure we all know people, some people have got fortunes of money or whatever, and they're always looking for more, and they're never satisfied, and they just don't find themselves. And it's hard to say that they're wealthy, okay? They may have a lot of wealth, they may have a lot of money, but they're not really wealthy. And you get people who have the basics, and you think they're kings. By the way, one of the stories that I once heard years ago, from I don't remember which Rebbe it was, but he was talking to one of the goyim, and one of the things that they really didn't understand about the Jews, the Jews we were talking about 200-300 years ago, were really downtrodden. They really didn't have food, money, anything. And during the week, they were poor people. But when Shabbat came, each and every one of them had their Shabbat clothes. They never wore during the week. And these Shabbat clothes weren't torn and tattered like the other clothes. And all of a sudden, all the Jews looked the same. It doesn't matter if one Jew was slightly wealthy or one Jew was slightly poorer. All the Jews suddenly looked regal in their Shabbat clothing. And this is because on Shabbat, your eyesight changes. You move from the vav, from the histaklut, from the sight, looking at things through the 6 days of the week, to looking at things through the 7th day, through the Shabbat. In other words, you move from the ayin to the zayin, and therefore you become wealthy. So that's the somech aniyim. In other words, once Hashem provides his support, the yud, to the ani, he become ayin atov. Okay, the other explanation, I just bring it here for completion, is simanim asa b'Torah. When you're learning, make tricks, make signs, so you'll remember what you're learning. I think we can connect this also, but I don't want to go there in the meantime because I don't want to spread this out too much. Okay, so the Otiyot de Rabbi Akiva, which is the midrash that the great Rabbi Akiva wrote, and goes back, we were talking about a source that goes back about 2,000 years. And there he says that Ein Ayin el Torah. In other words, what is Ayin? Ayin is a symbol of the Torah. And here I think we're talking about the depth, right? If you look at something in depth, you look at with the Ayin atov, and you try to understand, just like we said about the creation. Look at the potential of the creation, look what's hidden within the creation, and you look at the depth of the world, not just what you see on surface value. That is the eyesight of the Torah. Okay, I think that fits in also with what we're saying about the ayin, about moving from the left eye to the right eye, so to speak. Another interesting word is the word ma'ayan. Ma'ayan, besides being our daughter-in-law's name, is also a well. Okay, a well that as a source of water. And as we learned 3 weeks ago when we spoke about the mem, the mayim, that the water is the source of life, a well is the source of life, so to speak. Okay? In other words, it's not enough just to be blessed with water, but you've got to know how to drink that water, how to appreciate that water, how to get the best out of that water. We spoke a few minutes ago about right? The wealthy person is not just somebody who's got the money, but somebody who knows how to use that money correctly. The Gemara also uses another mashal. You get two people and you bring them both a lavish meal. If the person will eat the meal and eat it in the right way, he'll be healthy. The other person may stuff the food down his mouth, he'll feel sick, and he probably won't get any nourishment from that meal. The term that the Gemara uses, the food gets a blessing inside the person's stomach. In other words, when you want to make money, let's turn it into very simple commercial terms, right? What's important for you? A person goes to work, maybe the most important thing on a superficial level is how much money is going to be written on my salary slip. On the other hand, you could have two people. One person gets a relatively low salary slip. The other one gets a high one. But maybe the person with the low salary slip hasn't got a lot of expenses. And the person with the high salary slip, because of his lavish life and because he has to keep up with the Joneses or the Cohens, his expenses exceed his revenue. So it doesn't matter. The blessing is not what you get. The blessing is not what you see on the superficial level, what's printed on your salary slip. But the question is how that wealth turns into a blessing inside your stomach, spoke to be inside your lives. And that's what the Ayin teaches us. Okay. Another thing about the Ayin is that this is what we said before, and I'll just bring it as a second source. When we started off, that your eyes are the input to your mind, and the input not just for the physical things you see, but also for your thoughts. And we say twice a day when we read the Shema, and the third paragraph talks about the tzitzit. It says, "Lo tatu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem." You shouldn't run after your eyes and your hearts and your eyes. Okay, again, because the eyes are the window to the world, and focus the window so it'll focus you. If you focus your window on just looking at the things that don't bring you benefits, then your mind, your heart, everything you are will run after the things that don't really bring you a benefit. Another example, it's written in the Torah, and that's the term enei ha'edah. Okay, I'll change the font just to show that it's written in the Torah. And the enei ha'edah are the eyes of the nation, literally of the community. And who are these? These are the leaders, normally the Sanhedrin or the leaders of the people. And again, it's interesting that they're called the eyes of the nation. And we know that if you have leaders, if you have, it could be the same nation, but one time you have leaders that are a little bit blind and they lead us in the wrong direction, the whole nation gets confused. And looking at the positive side, obviously, when you have the great leaders, the whole atmosphere and the whole output of the nation is a very different kettle of fish. There's a halakha that according to the Torah, a blind person only fulfills the mitzvot from a rabbinical point of view. But according to the Torah, the dry Torah, he's actually patur. He's not required to fulfill the mitzvah. And I think the idea here is that a blind person is missing. Okay, it's not his fault, but he's missing the ability to connect his input, his inner self to the outer world, and therefore the Torah cannot obligate him to keep the Torah. Nevertheless, we give him the best benefit that we can, and that's why the rabbis say that even though from the Torah he doesn't need to keep the Torah, he is required to keep mitzvot, even though he's blind. And again, I'm emphasizing here that this is not because he's to blame, but that's the reality he's in, which, maybe he doesn't need to keep all the mitzvot, but he's in a different place. We spoke already about Ayin Tov. I'm going to repeat. And here I'm going to say something that I just saw this last night, and I think it's quite amazing, that when it talks about the mitzvah of tefillin, now we all know, here's the picture of this kid putting on tefillin, and he's put it on top of his forehead above his hairline, which is where he's meant to do it, at the end of the hairline, right? He says, if you can look at me, right? The hairline over here before we go bald, and then your tefillin should not go past that point. And that's very important, by the way. The men on the call should know that if your tefillin are below that, you're not really fulfilling the mitzvah. So it's a mistake made by a lot of people, and you could be putting on your tefillin on your head for 120 years, and at the end of the day, not have fulfilled the mitzvah of tefillin. It's got to be up above. But the question is, if that's the case, then why did the Torah write that the tefillin must be b'hayula tutafot b'neinecha? The tefillin on the head must be between your eyes, and for a sign between your eyes. Literally between your eyes should be here. So all sorts of traditional explanations have been given. But there's a modern explanation based on new revelations in anatomy, that the way the eyes work, apparently, I'm not a doctor, but this is what I read last night, that your left eye gets a signal and it's processed in the right part of the brain, and your right eye gets a signal and it's processed in the left part of the brain. And the place that these two come together, in order for us to see three-dimensional, we need both eyes to come together and see a complete picture, is actually in this intersection over here that occurs just above the head, unbelievably exactly in the spot where we put in the tefillin. So according to this, when the Torah says you should put them between your eyes, he's talking about the actual place where the eyes do the work, not the senses that just get the signal, but the processing place where it turns the image into a picture. So I guess this is an example of looking at things superficially. The Torah is missing something here. There's a drush, we don't really understand it. And then sometimes, even after many, many years, suddenly we get a deeper understanding, and there's a different view of what the eyes are and what the eyes mean. The number 70, we said that 70 is a complete picture of the world, because it takes the 7, which is a combination of Hashem, the godliness and the physicality, and then you put them together, you get a complete picture of the world. And here are some examples where the number 70 is used in our sources, and we see how it fits in with this idea. There's Shivim Panim LaTorah, right? In other words, every time you see the pasuk or word in the Torah, there are 70 different explanations that are valid for that, and don't contradict each other, but completely complement each other. And again, why? Because the Torah is taking God's word and giving it its application in this world, and therefore it's appropriate that there'll be 70 and not 60 and not 80 Panim LaTorah. The nations of the world, who comprise the whole of humanity, all the nefashot in the world, are 70 nations. And against that, the heart of the nations are the children of Israel. And we came a tribe when we went down to Egypt. We were a family of them, the children of Jacob. And at that point, when we go down, the Torah lists all the people, Jacob and his 12 sons and the grandsons, goes through, and you get exactly 66. And then the Torah adds that Joseph and his sons and his wife were in Egypt. All in all, 70 people. Why did the Torah have to do that? We could count ourselves. The Torah assumes that we got the ability to count to 70. But the emphasis here is that the significance in the number 70. Now we're becoming a nation that is the heart of the world, and we have one person at this point of time representing each one of the nations, because we have to uplift the whole of the nations. And how do we uplift them? By taking the Yud and adding it to the Vav. That's the 70. After the first temple was built, and we didn't live up to what was expected from us, we went into exile to correct this. To get it's not just punishment, but it's a means of fixing what we had done wrong. And the first exile was 70 years, and we're told that it would be 70 years. And there's lots of calculations how you exactly count the 70 years, and that again fits in with the same idea. This is something that I'd never seen before, interestingly enough. I hope I got the calculation right, because they didn't do the calculation for me, but I saw in this book of Rav Tamir that he says that there's 70 holy days in the year. There are 52 Shabbases, 8 days of Sukkot, 7 days of Pesach. We're not talking about the extra days that they add overseas. We're talking about according to the Torah. 1 day of Shavuot, 1 day of Rosh Hashanah. The second day of Rosh Hashanah, even in Israel, is a rabbinical edition, and 1 day of Yom Kippur. So if you add that up, you get 70, and that again is taking the whole year. The year is the Vav, the physical, etc., and taking the Yud of the year, which are these 70. And together we have the number 70 that the letter Ayin represents. And finally, the last point is this table. And I'm going to start just with the first line, and then we'll run through the other examples. We all know the story in the Garden of Eden that Adam and Eve were naked, and they didn't know they were naked. And then they ate from the fruit of the tree that they were not meant to eat from. And then they realized they were naked, and then they took fig leaves and covered themselves. And then afterwards, Hashem made them courtאינה or clothing made of or, with an Ayin, skin. And the Gemara brings Rabbi Meir, who says that initially, Adam and Eve, they had courtאינה or with an Aleph. They were on such a spiritual level that their clothing was spiritual clothing, the clothing of light. And when they ate the fruit that they shouldn't have done, the first sin, they dropped a level, and therefore they needed a courtאינה or clothing of skin. And therefore he says it's not that Hashem made a mink coat for them, but rather he's talking about the skin that we have today. In other words, there was a different reality in the Garden of Eden that you can't really understand, where we didn't have the physical skin, but we were completely spiritual. And the difference between the two ors, even though they sound the same, if we're Temani, we'd say or and or, but they sound very similar either way. But the difference is that if it's with an Aleph, it's something that's more spiritual. And if it's with an Ayin, it's more connected to the physical world. Okay? Like the Ayin that we've spoken about. And then he, in the same book that I just showed you now, he brings a list of words where you see that it's a pattern, the sounding word, that if it's got an Aleph, it's more spiritual, and if it's got an Ayin, it's more physical. So the word Osher in Aleph, with an Aleph, is happiness. And the word Osher with an Ayin is wealth, is money. Again, we spoke about people think that money is everything, but we know that happiness is, wealth is just a means to get happiness. If somebody is physically standing, or made in Ayin, but that's the actual measurement if he's standing. But if you give an estimation of how much he's worth, or how he's going to stand, that's called Omed with an Aleph. If you physically tear something, you do Kri'ah with an Ayin. But if you just read it, if you get the quality out of it and read content, you're doing Kri'ah with an Aleph. An Atzel, a person who's lazy. Laziness means your physical side is weighing you down. You're Atzel, you're an Atzlan, an Ayin. But if you're noble, if you're able of overcoming the things that normally bog you down, because you've got power of the neshama, the soul, of the mind, then you're noble, then you're atzil with an aleph. Afar is dust from sand that never had any life. Afer is the dust, the ashes, but from a fire, which is something that we can't see as more spiritual. The word al is to be on top of something, physically on it, where to the word el is you're going towards something. So this is another aspect of the ayin, which shows the ayin as something physical, but connected to the spiritual, and compared to the aleph, which we started off this whole series with, which is something completely spiritual. So even though I tried to make the introduction a bit smaller, we still gone on for 45 minutes. But nevertheless, I'll do a 1-minute review of the 5 letters before we end off. So we're saying that Ayin is parallel to the 70. It's the I as input and output. We have the good and the bad I between the Vav and the Zayin. And all the time, we try and look at the bad I, which looks at things superficially, only physically, and looking at the spiritual eye, which tries to see the godliness within the physicality. That is the number 70 that combines Hashem with the physical world, like the number 7, but taking it to the nation. Okay, that's the Ayin Tov, the Ayin Ra, and we spoke about the two, the Al. Okay, that's one of the words that appeared on the table. Also, that this is the Bereshit at this initial stage, where we still see things on a superficial level, but if we've got the ability to see the El, where the world's going to, we see what the potential, we actually see the Ayin Tov. So that's the letter for today. And if there are any questions before we turn off the recording, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.